I just hope viewers take away that it's an entertaining show and that this family is not much different than their own family. And that, we normalize watching people of color centered in their own stories.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're all having a wonderful day today. My name is Dalal, and you're watching the Popcorn and Soda Podcast, the show where we discuss all things movies, pop culture, and so much more. As always, I want to thank each and every one of you for making me a small part of your day. On today's show, we're joined by a very special guest. She stars. Hello, everyone. I hope you're all having a wonderful day today. My name is Dalal, and you're watching the Popcorn and Soda Podcast, the show where we discuss all things movies, pop culture, and so much more. As always, I want to thank each and every one of you for making me a small part of your day. On today's show, we're joined by a very special guest. She stars as Police Officer Sabrina Sohal in the latest CBC police drama, Allegiance, a show that deals with culture, politics, and law enforcement, which premieres on February 7th on CBC and CBC Gem. On the show today, the very talented Miss Supinder Wraich. As a creative
Yeah.
yourself, how are you feeling at the start of 2024 in Allegiance?
Um, you know what? Really hopeful. Really hopeful. Like I remember when I created my series for CBC, and at the time it was, the first sort of dramatic series to center around a Sikh Punjabi family. And it was on the Gem platform, which is the online platform, and we had a smaller budget. Um, but I really had the vision for seeing ourselves, our stories portrayed with characters that are not idealized. They're flawed, they're nuanced, they're good, and they're bad. And then all of a sudden, a close friend of mine, Anara Ali, who I know very well, we were at the CFC together, wrote this show, and then suddenly, I'm in a larger production of something I had dreamed of and wanted. So I feel very hopeful to be here in this moment.
Well, that's awesome. And before we deep dive into all things Allegiance, I'm very fascinated by your story, Savinder. Being a fellow South Asian, I feel like we're naturally intrigued by other creatives with similar backgrounds and their journey in this medium because it's not a career path that, we grow up being told that, yes, you can go out to be an aspiring actor or something in the film industry or TV industry. So for yourself, generally, like, where does this all begin for you and what made you want to be an actor?
Um, I think there was a couple different reasons. So I um, grew up the child of, people who had immigrated from India and worked long and hard hours. And so there was an element, I think, of childhood where I kind of raised myself. A lot of it was in front of a TV as as sort of a teacher or a guardian. And so that question in my head of, how do you do that? How do you get there? How do these people find themselves in this television? And so there was that was one question, and the other was, self-expression wasn't readily available in my family in terms of the arts, and it's really interesting. You see so many South Asian creators, right? Um, like I'm thinking of like the Lily Singhs of the world. I'm thinking of these people who are just like, I have something to say, and I'm gonna hell or high water figure out a way to do it. And so that was kind of my first introduction to acting. Was I was in an acting class, and I had this monologue that was given to me, and it was, a woman whose life circumstances were so different than mine, but I could feel my heart coming out of the things that she was saying in a way that within my family and even with my friends to a certain extent, I had never allowed myself to speak before, in terms of my sadness, my guilt, my anger, like all of those sort of raw emotions. Um, and I remember being in that acting class and thinking, you know, I got to find a way to do this because it makes me feel so alive. And that was really where I got the idea that I wanted to do this for a living, and then set off on the path of, trying to convince those people who had power over me, i.e., my parents, um, that this was a viable career. And so for me, I started with film school. And I wasn't outright like, oh, I'm going to become an actor because I think they would have just been like, what?
That's
And
not a job, right?
that's yeah, but you know what's interesting because it's not that they don't know that it's a job. Like, I think that, coming from a South Asian background, your exposure to Bollywood is massive. Like
Oh yeah.
they knew it was a job, but I think for them it wasn't a job, especially in that world, that any normal person could aspire to, because a lot of times it was held by the children of celebrity. That it was very much that was sort of the path, and for them, they were. I think there was less of a you can't do this, but we don't know how to help you in this career, and so because we have fear of your success, the approval was harder to get. And so I found that the more I pursued it after film, like after film school, I started to book commercials, and all of a sudden they started to see me on television, and their friends started to see me on television. And then it became more of a viable career. And it was no longer, oh, I'm not just a film student, but I kind of want to pursue this acting thing. And for years, um, being an actor is not a linear career
Oh yeah.
by any means. And so, you get a little bit of success and then you're back on that roller coaster. And I remember having these conversations with my dad, and he would just be like, so how's it going? And feeling that need to justify, I'm okay. I'm taking care of myself, and, always having a second job on the side to facilitate the thing that I was trying to do, the thing that I love to do. And so that constant reassurance was something that I found that they needed, because that how's it going really meant like, are you okay? Are you surviving?
Yeah.
Are you going to be okay? Are you going to have all the things that we want for you? So I think that that's part of where a bit of that fear comes from. And, as artists, we find clever ways to assuage those fears.
Oh yeah. Definitely. And you know what? I'm so happy that you stuck with it because it leads us straight to Allegiance. And I had the opportunity to watch the pilot, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And what I absolutely love about this show is that it does something very unique that I don't see in shows that are about diversity that often, and is that it normalizes that this is what Canada is. There's no elaborate backstory about Sabrina and the world that she's in. The setting in the show tells a story of what it's like to be in Canada. Like, South Asians are everywhere in part of Canada, and we're active members of society. We have our own history here for hundreds of years. This is normal, and I so appreciate that because, like, down to the little references, like the tiffin box in the first episode, the clothing of the people, like on the streets, the language, it doesn't try to like feed us a narrative. So for you, like, how important was it as an actress, and especially for the character of Sabrina, to inhabit this world that already exists?
So a lot of that job was done for me from the writers when I came to the scripts, in terms of the how this family was developed and what we explained and what we didn't feel the need to explain, and some of that is done in the direction as well. But what I will say I found really interesting. So Anar Ali, who wrote and created the series, our showrunners are Mark Ellis and Stephanie Morgenstern. So they wrote the episodes together, but Anar created the series, and she's a South Asian woman. And for her, it was really important to explore this family that had been here for generations. But it was interesting to me because I was actually born in India. And so I came here as somebody who is newly immigrated and went through ESL and went through all of these experiences that were central to the creation of my identity. And so it was a bit of a leap for me to understand, what does it mean to come from a family that has been here for generations? That, when somebody says, oh, where are you from? I say, I'm from Punjab, I'm Punjabi. But when somebody asks Sabrina where she's from, she's Canadian.
Yeah.
And so I think the name is really attuned in terms of where her allegiances lie, because up until this catastrophic event happens to her father, she considers herself very much so Canadian, and her father's Canadian. Like her family has been in Canada for generations. But then when her father's charged with treason, which is a crime that he's charged with particularly because his appearance is the way that it
Yeah.
is, because his beliefs are the way that it is. You wouldn't take a Caucasian politician and charge them with treason, which is acts against their own country, because their country, for all intents and purposes, is Canada. But this man, you can attribute a different country to him. And so I thought it was fascinating that those themes of, Sabrina's allegiance to like her country, which is Canada, Sabrina's allegiance to her father and what it means to serve that family, especially when he's in peril. And then also this South Asian identity, which she's proud of, but also hasn't um, aligned herself with until really this event happens. And she has to look at the way not necessarily she sees herself, but how other people see her.
So, take me back to day one of shooting. And of course, you are surrounded by a big cast, big crew, but this is a big CBC show, and you're the lead, the quarterback on the screen for this show. So, what were you feeling that day? How did that day go for you?
Um, Honestly, it went really well because like day one of production wasn't really day one. Because day one happened before production, which is, arriving, going for the wardrobe fittings, meeting with hair and makeup, having these conversations. The interesting thing is, the higher up that you are on the call sheet, the more you're included. In fact, I think I've probably been more nervous on a day one of a show where I've had less to do just because I knew less coming in, as a number
Right.
six or a number 12 or number 24, you're kind of expected to do all your work by yourself. And then you show up and you kind of throw it at the wall and say, hey, is this right? This is all my homework that I did alone. And then, you play around with it on the day with the director. But being number one is you're privy to all of these conversations beforehand. What does Sabrina's hair look like? How, where does her family come from? What's her relationship with her father? And meeting those characters before. So, um, you know what? Day one, I was really confident. Day one, we got in there. Um, I think the first scene is a running scene, so I didn't have any lines. I just needed to be in her headspace, and yeah, it was just. The other thing is like the cast and the crew, there was a commitment to telling this story authentically as possible, and letting the people who needed to lead at times have that space to make their voices heard. So the beginning of day one, we spoke as a group about what we were doing and how important it was for us to have a dialogue with one another to not just not just make sure that like it's not a pat on the back, but really a conversation, a continued conversation of, hey, especially when it comes to like there's so many elements like, hey, I've put this food on your table. Is it accurate?
Right.
Would you eat this? If we shoot this, does it make sense for this family? Hey, I have this pot. How do you make jaw? Right? Like, and so this encouragement of because we haven't done this before, because this isn't your typical television show, because we're trying to do everything with authenticity, that we need to have those conversations and people need to have the space to ask questions. And there's not an assumption that, well, you're going to have to, done your job at home, but let's figure this out as we go along so we can try to get it as right as possible.
I think it's so neat that we have a story about South Asians on CBC, and more importantly, having a lead of the show who is South Asian. And like growing up, wasn't a single show or a movie that I watched that you really had that as much. Literally, it was maybe like Harold and Kumar, Apu from The Simpsons, and like Naveen Andrews in Lost. So, what do you hope people take away from Allegiance and the diversity and inclusion that's built into the show?
I think that like the biggest thing for me is, and Bilal, you kind of touched on it when we first started speaking, was that we don't really, it's not a learning lesson here, right? Like we're we're not creating a PSA. It's an
Right.
entertaining, fun, show with a lead and a family that looks a little bit different. So I think that, but at the end of the day, I just hope viewers take away that it's an entertaining show and that this family is not much different than their own family. And that, we normalize watching people of color centered in their own stories and that it's not a strange thing of like, I understand that we're having a moment here. Um, but I don't think that this show is other than, it's a different family, it's a different circumstance. I don't think that the mechanics of this is that much different than any other police procedural that somebody would hope to tune into on a Wednesday night at 9.
Yeah, absolutely. And you just nailed it with that. And I think people are going to really take that away from watching this show. As, again, as I mentioned earlier, we're so used to having those PSAs in TV shows, movies. And, you'd like to think that everyone's heart's in the right place when it comes to those, because I know it's been very challenging for many years, decades for representation. But a show like this, again, what I love, it just normalizes everything. And just, again, like you mentioned, South Asians are no different than, the Joneses next door, where everyone's at the end of the day has the same story and the same family dynamics for the most part. So I'm really excited for everyone to catch Allegiance because I think it's going to be a great show for everyone to watch. So as we wrap up here with Supinder Wraich, it is now time for a segment I call the final act. Supinder, I'm going to ask you 10 rapid fire questions
Oh
about your
no.
likes, your dislikes. I just want the first thing that comes to your mind. But here's the catch. We're going to try to get through them in 60 seconds or less. Are you up for it?
Yikes. Okay. Let's do it.
Movies or TV shows?
Right now, The Diplomat
Watch at home or at a movie theater?
at a movie theater.
Favorite movie?
The Lives of Others.
Favorite TV show? Not named Diplomat.
Sopranos. Sopranos.
What's your go-to theater snack?
Popcorn.
Favorite South Asian dish?
Matar paneer.
Summer or fall?
Summer.
Does pineapple belong on pizza?
Yes.
Favorite drink at Tim's?
Ice cap.
Lastly, describe Allegiance in one word.
Authentic.
Bam. Supinder, you crushed it. You got it right underneath that 1 minute mark. I love it. I love how confident you wrote those answers. I'm not too sure about the pineapple on pizza part, but hey, first time guest on the show, I will let that pass.
I feel like that's a biased question in the way that you proposed it.
I know,
Does it
right? It's
belong?
almost like asking for the answer, like it's a rhetorical question almost. But hey, you know what?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
appreciate your confidence in how actively said yes. But hey, that's awesome. So,
I love
Spinder,
pineapple on pizza.
Spinder, thank you so much for being a guest on the show today. And as I mentioned, I'm so excited for people to start seeing this show, which of course airs February 7th on CBC and CBC Gem. And more importantly, I'm excited for you and the entire team behind the scenes. And I think what this show is going to do continuously for South Asian representation. I wish you all the best with the release of Allegiance, and I look forward to having you back on the show to discuss the next one.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.